The case that will be discussed here regards Sosa v. Alvarez. In 1990, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States began to investigate the murder of an agent and his pilot in Mexico. News reports had maintained that the United States government, represented by the DEA, had promised a reward of $100,000 to Mexican nationals if they captured one of the suspected participants and sent him to the United States for trial, but the DEA denied these claims. Humberto Alvarez-Mechain was abducted by several bounty hunters, including José Francisco Sosa, and was put on a plane for the U.S. The case was taken by the District Court for the Central District of California. Initially, it was ruled by the Court of First Instance and by the Court of Appeal that his forcible abduction by Sosa violated the extradition treaty between the United States and Mexico, but the Supreme Court overturned that decision. Alvarez-Mechain was acquitted in 1993 of all charges, as there was insufficient evidence to support the case, and he was subsequently sent back to Mexico.
In 1993, upon his return to Mexico, Alvarez-Mechain filed a civil action in the United States District Court for the Central District of California. He sought to hold the U.S. liable for false arrest upon his arrival in the United States under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and another one against several Mexican nationals, including Sosa, under unlawful arbitrary arrest under international law, and more specifically under the Alien Tort Statute. Although the original purpose of the statute was to assure foreign governments that the United States would act to prevent breaches of international law, it was principally aimed at diplomatic and state affairs rather than individual cases. The claim against the United States was dismissed, but the one against Sosa was granted because it violated international law, and he was asked to pay $25,000 in damages for the transborder abduction of Alvarez-Mechain.
In 2001, Alvarez-Mechain and Sosa simultaneously filed separate appeals. An en banc court hearing was initiated to head the appeal. On one hand, the Court of Appeals reaffirmed the verdict on Sosa, supporting the judgment on the fact that Alvarez-Mechain's abduction could not be considered as an arbitrary arrest under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and it therefore violated international law. On the other hand, the court reversed the initial dismissal of Alvarez-Mechain's claim against the United States that he had based on the Federal Tort Claims Act and held that he could sue the U.S. for the tort of false arrest. Indeed, the court established that Alvarez-Mechain's arrest, planned by the DEA in the U.S., was unlawful because when Washington ratified the covenant, it was implied that the international treaty was not self-executing and that the Federal Tort Claims Act did not apply to individuals in this case.
Alvarez claimed that his arrest by Sosa was arbitrary because the warrant for his arrest only authorized his arrest within the United States, and Sosa's abduction constituted a violation of international law. Moreover, through the Federal Tort Claims Act, he argued that the United States was liable because the abduction had been planned by U.S. representatives, so his abduction was unlawful.
The Supreme Court rejected this notion, presenting how the power of the court to try a person for a crime supersedes, stating that the power of a court to try a person for a crime is not impaired by the fact that they were brought before the court due to forcible abduction. Moreover, it claimed that the Federal Tort Claims Act could not be applied to this case, as the abduction had been undertaken outside of the U.S. territory by a foreign national and not directly by a U.S. agent.
It is a rule of law that the international legal system applies to the U.S. apparatus. Since the abduction of a foreign national does not amount to arbitrary arrest within the meaning of international law, the United States would have acted unlawfully if it had sent Sosa to abduct Alvarez-Mechain.
DEA arrests in Mexico don't necessarily violate UDHR or ICCPR because they are not self-executing, meaning that the UDHR or the ICCPR are guidelines for policy but do not have the legal infrastructure or means to be applied in court.
The Federal Tort Claims Act is supposed to allow individuals to sue the United States, as historically states enjoyed a certain degree of immunity against private parties. It maintains that people acting on behalf of the United States should be considered in court as the United States itself.